Welcome to the Inside Elections podcast, where we analyze elections in a nonpartisan, data-driven, and accessible way. In this special Wolverine episode, we'll tackle the first big breaking news of the 2026 fight for the Senate, including Democrat Gary Peters' surprise decision not to seek re-election and what this means for his now open Battleground seat. We'll talk through how Peters' decision could have a domino effect in Michigan's other 2026 contests, including 4 House districts and the open gubernatorial race. And we'll do it all with the reporter who broke the story on Tuesday, Melissa Nann Burke of the Detroit News. Buckle up. I'm Jacob Rubashkin, Deputy Editor of Inside Elections, the go-to place for nonpartisan news and analysis for more than 40 years. And I spent this past weekend in Cedar Grove, New Jersey, which is part of the 11th congressional district in that state, represented by Democrat Mikey Sherrill.
And I'm Nathan Gonzales, editor and publisher of Inside Elections. And later today, I'll be driving a group of middle schoolers up to Pennsylvania's 13th district, which is just across the border from Maryland. They will be doing some skiing at Liberty Mountain. This is a district represented by Republican John Joyce. I will be trying to do some work from the lodge. It's exciting. I'm not just leaving you, abandoning you, Jacob. I will be trying to work.
Working. You'll be on the field reporting on John Joyce's highly competitive 2026 re-election campaign, right?
I hope people can pick up the sarcasm on
you can ask him if he's going to run for governor.
If I see him, I will ask him what he's doing there.
I'm sure he's held a fundraiser at that lodge at some point.
Yeah. It is funny that growing up in the West, what qualifies as a mountain, the definition of mountain is very different from Pennsylvania to Oregon, but that's okay. We'll let
as someone whose most recent ski lodge was Wisp in McHenry, Maryland, that mountainous part of the country. I'll keep quiet here.
That's right. You got to take what you can get.
Let's just go over a few quick headlines that people shouldn't miss from the last couple weeks in electoral news. Nathan, what do you got?
Republicans Jimmy Patronis and Randy Fine won special election primaries on Tuesday in Florida's 2 vacant House seats left behind by Matt Gaetz and Trump National Security Advisor Mike Waltz. But Patronis and Fine won't be able to vote in Congress until after they win the special general elections on April 1st. So Speaker Mike Johnson will still be down a couple votes on Capitol Hill.
Yeah, these are 2 heavily Republican districts where the primaries were essentially the only game in town there. So 2 new Republican members on track, but not quite there yet. In Arizona, Congressman Andy Biggs is moving toward a 2026 gubernatorial run. He filed paperwork and began the process of collecting signatures, but the former Freedom Caucus chairman does not have a clean path to the nomination. 2022 candidate Karen Taylor Robeson, who lost that primary to Carrie Lake, has indicated she might run, and if she does, the wealthy businesswoman will have a strong backer in President Donald Trump, who has already announced his endorsement of her if she chooses to run again.
And that Trump endorsement continues to be very important in primaries. Republicans Ashley Moody and John Husted were appointed to the Florida and Ohio Senate seats, vacated by Marco Rubio and J.D. Vance. Both Moody and Husted are expected to seek election to the remainder of those terms and start as considerable favorites to win, even though Democrats probably need at least one of those states to be competitive to have a chance at gaining the 4 seats that they need for a majority in November of 2026.
Yeah, and that Husted appointment especially shakes up not only the Senate race, but the governor's race, because that was what he had been gunning for the last 8 years, candidly, when it
maybe
comes
more.
to maybe more. So a lot of developments there, but 2 states Democrats have struggled in but need to regain their footing in if they want to win back the Senate. A state where Democrats are not going to be competitive in. South Dakota has the newest governor in America, Larry Roden, who took over the top spot when Kristi Noem, who has been governor since 2019, was sworn in as the Secretary of the Department of Homeland Security. Roden is a rancher. He was lieutenant governor. Before that, he was a state legislator, and he actually ran for Senate in 2014 in the Republican primary as the more conservative alternative to former Governor Mike Rounds. He was backed by Tea Party groups. He lost that primary. And of course, Rounds is now in the United States Senate. But Roden is in a pretty powerful position himself. But depending on how he plays his cards over the next year or so, he could definitely have some primary challengers for that South Dakota gubernatorial spot.
Just another reminder that just because you are unsuccessful in a bid for an office does not mean that you cannot get to that office later.
I want to welcome our guest, Melissa Nann Burke of the Detroit News. Melissa is the News's Washington bureau chief. And before she was at the Detroit News, she also wrote for the Wilmington News Journal in Delaware and the York Daily Record in Pennsylvania. Melissa, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Now, you know the drill here. Whenever you come on our show, you got to answer our questions. So please tell us, which congressional district did you grow up in?
It is currently Pennsylvania 6, represented by Kristi Houlihan.
And what was life like in the 6th district of Pennsylvania growing up?
Well, back when I was growing up there, it was, I believe, represented by Republicans. You guys can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it's only recently that Chester County, Pennsylvania, which is one of the big 4-ring suburbs around Philly, started to get bluer. And so my parents, I think, were a little surprised to see the shift. They still live there. And but I'm told she has a reputation for great constituent services from my mom and her friends who talk.
And was you're in politics and journalism now as a political reporter. Which one of those came first as a youngster?
I grew up in a pretty apolitical household. We didn't really talk politics much. I came to politics by way of, after having come in government at my previous jobs, like more executive agencies and things like that, and really had never covered a legislature till I got to Congress. So it was a bit of a dive in when I got here about almost 10 years ago next month. So.
Yeah, I think, Kristi Houlihan and that kind of area is emblematic of a larger shift that we've seen in the politics all around the country, right, over the last 10 years or so since Trump came on the scene, and kind of those suburban areas that, Chester County was solidly Republican for 50 years, and then with kind of beginning with Obama and then really accelerating in the Trump era, has become a Democratic stronghold. I mean, I think Harris won Chester by 14 or 15 points in 2024. And we've seen a lot of those candidates like Houlihan, who won her first race in 2018, rise to the forefront of the Democratic Party establishment, the vanguard of the party, and Abigail Spanberger, Alyssa Slotkin, Mikey Sherrill, a lot of the women, especially like Houlihan, who had those national security backgrounds, now running for higher office. I know Houlihan, I think, has been recruited to run for statewide office in Pennsylvania before, and has so far said no. So we'll see where the future takes her. But a pretty interesting political place at the moment right now, and one that I think has a lot of lessons.
Well, we are excited to have you because you are the perfect guest to talk about our main topic. So, but Jacob, lead us.
Yeah, it's a Michigan focused episode. We threw out the script because Melissa yesterday morning and we're taping on Wednesday here. You unofficially kicked off the 2026 Senate news cycle, essentially, when you broke the story that two-term Democratic Senator Gary Peters of Michigan is not going to seek re-election to a third term. Let's take a brief listen to what Senator Peters said in a video he released on Tuesday explaining his decision.
Our founding fathers envisioned members of Congress as citizens, serving their country for a few terms, and then returning to private life. I agree. After 3 terms in the House and 2 terms in the Senate, I believe now is time for me to write a few more paragraphs in my current chapter and then turn over the reins. I will therefore not seek re-election in 2026.
Gary Peters is just 66 years old, which is essentially the average age for a United States senator. And I certainly hadn't heard any chatter about the potential for a retirement here until you broke this story. So, Melissa, tell us, was this news a surprise to you that Peters is hanging up the cleats? And what are you hearing from Democrats in the state? How are Democrats reacting to this development?
So I would say yes. Overall, this was a shock to almost everybody, except maybe people super close to the Peters family. But there had been some chatter in recent weeks, that he was looking at this decision. I had asked him a couple times since the fall, whether he was, going to officially run. And I think that that's part of the reason that he came to me with this news. But it's incredibly unusual, I think, for someone to kind of, especially at least in Michigan politics, to walk away at 66, 68 voluntarily. It's not. I talked to someone who watches this stuff closely yesterday in Michigan, and it's nobody could really think off the top of their heads of the last time this had happened. That this gentleman I talked to went back to 1922, and there was only 3 senators who had voluntarily left who were younger than Gary Peters. The most recent was Don Regal in 94. He had gotten caught up in the Keating 5 savings and loan scandal. Phil Hart, of course, Phil Hart of the Hart Plaza in Detroit and the office building, Hart office building, as you guys probably know, turned out that Hart had cancer, and he, I think, passed away before his term even was over. And then there was another guy that I hadn't heard of, Truman Newberry, who resigned in 1922 and ended up being convicted of a bunch of things later. So it's unusual, unless somebody is sick or something happens, I think, to see something like this, especially when Peters is, only been there for 2 terms, and he has finally built up, it takes time with the seniority system in the Senate. He's finally built up, some plum assignments. He was chairman of Homeland Security panel, is now still the top Democrat there. He's on appropriations. He's on armed services. He just finished 2 cycles chairing the DS. So it was surprising. I would say that if you look at it from a human being point of view, though, chairing the cycle, 2 cycles of the DS, and then also chairing a committee at the same time, I'm sure he's tired. And I think he's doing this on his own terms. He decided he wanted to go do something else. When you consider he's been basically running for public office since the 1990s, it's not as much of a surprise, especially when you have a little brand new grandbaby on the West Coast, who I think is just about a year old, that he wants to see more.
And thank you for bringing that sort of personal element or those factors into it, because I think sometimes it can be easy to lose those when we're talking about races, which is what we love to do. But there is that human element, and there are different times that people can leave. Lately, it does seem like we're seeing senators leave when they're extremely old, and the only thing left to do is sort of ride into their sunset of their life. But you can leave earlier and get other jobs or do other things, and have fulfilling, productive roles. I think, Peters is an example of this.
I guess, Nathan, this is where you and I have personality differences, because I'm curious, Melissa, you just ran down the last several Michigan senators who quit ahead of schedule. Is there any indication that there is something else going on with Peters? Good, bad, whatever, whatever valence, that is something more than just wanting to find more roads to ride his Harley down, which I think is, what he said in his video. Is there any indication that there's something else going on here?
Not that I have caught whiff of. I will say, you never know, but I did specifically ask, as I do all of our folks when they tell me they're retiring. I said, is there a medical diagnosis? Is there a health issue for you or somebody else close to you in your family? He said, absolutely not. I'm perfectly healthy. This is just, he kept saying this is a normal thing for people want to do other things. And I can't think of like some even at least in the time that I've covered him, any sort of major scandal that has rocked, Peter's world. But I think there's a question I'm sure you guys are familiar with, which is like, the lure of private, going back into the private sector and making more money than the members of Congress and senators do make it's got to be on these guys' minds, like, and gals, as they're looking at whether they want to go through another grueling reelection cycle. And I did try to get into a little bit with him, and he kept saying he wants to do something else. I said, well, what do you want to do? And he brought up that he would like to go back to teaching. He was in academia a bit before he ran for the U.S. House in 2008. And or like in the think tank world, I think he's very interested in AI, artificial intelligence, and kind of the role of technology and equitable access to that. So that also didn't jump out at me as like something that you make millions doing. So any of those options. So I don't know what he'll end up doing, but that is what he said when I asked. So I didn't get much further. It doesn't seem like he has anything solid lined up. I'll put it that way.
He's going to be a public works commissioner.
Yeah. It's happened in Michigan.
Exactly. And I Peters is even younger than this, but I remember when Jackie Speer in California, the congresswoman from California, retired in 2022, she was 72. And she said that when she told Nancy Pelosi, who she was a close ally with, that she was not running for re-election, Pelosi's response was, "But you're so young," which I think is just a real window into the mindset in Washington, D.C. But I think it'll be interesting to see what Peters does now, because he is young for a retiring politician. But how did this news fall on the ears of Michigan Democrats? What was the reaction when this story came out?
I think it's safe to say a lot of people were stunned. I think particularly coming on the heels of Senator Stabenow's retirement, politicos in Michigan who watched this kind of thing, we kind of had just finished that year of like everybody celebrating her legacy, et cetera. And then this just was so unexpected. And everybody in Michigan has really been focused on who's going to run for governor. That is kind of that's been the what has kept everybody talking, seeing who's going to run it, who's going to jump in to the governor's race. This announcement also had to be tough news for maybe the state party that is now going to be looking at defending not just this new Senate seat, this open Senate seat, but governorship is up, AG is up, Secretary of State, basically the three constitutional row offices in the state, all held by Democrats right now, who are all term limited and can't run again. So that's a lot of those 4 statewide offices to be defending open in 2 years is just fair warning to anybody who's going to come visit Michigan and try to watch TV. The ads next year it's just going to be constant. So we also, as you guys know, have 3 to 4 very competitive congressional races that overlap a few of the media markets. So we will be very busy. Our politics team will be will not be bored.
And just to get it out of the way, Gary Peters isn't going to run for governor, right?
He told me no. I did ask. I did ask that. I think the strong suggestion for you guys probably saw his video yesterday too. The strong suggestion is that he wants to pass the baton to the next generation, to the younger generation. So I think what this does, of course, though, is set off an absolute scramble, on both sides of the aisle to figure out, who's going to run. I think this will affect the governor's race, though, of course, right? I think we will see maybe a thinning of the field there because some of those folks might decide instead to jump in to the Senate race. And a few folks, who I'm sure we'll get into this, did indicate yesterday that they're still looking at both, haven't made up their minds yet.
And before we get into those names, I have to say that I wrote a draft of a column that's now on Roll Call about open seats and how there weren't any Senate open seats and how every cycle since 1930, there's always at least one open seat. And that draft I had handed it over to Jacob to read, and then you broke the story in the morning, like, oh, well, at least I get a chance to revise it and bring some of that context. But I was right that there's always at least one open seat, and I think there will be more according to history. But we had previously had Michigan Senate rated as one of the few battleground races for 2026, as you mentioned. It's even more so a battleground now. But there are a lot of people that are looking. So I don't know, Jacob, maybe walk us through who's out there, or how do we want to do this?
Yeah, I mean, I think there are names that have been floated. There were names that were floated in the Senate race in 2024. The names that are kind of out there that people are talking about. The congressional delegation, you've got Hillary Skolton in the 3rd district. You've got Haley Stevens. You've got Sri Tanadar. You have the Lieutenant Governor Garland Gilchrist. You have the state AG. You've got Pete Buttigieg floating around. I'm sure there are plenty of other people. How many of these folks, Melissa, would you say are serious that you think stand a good chance of getting into this Senate race now that it's opened up for an opportunity for Democrats that 3 days ago nobody was counting on?
Well, I'll start with Sri Tanadar. He actually said yesterday he's going to stay in the 13th, and he's not considering it. A couple others that took their name out. Governor Whitmer was one name we were hearing very early on. She's not going to run for this, according to her PAC. And Debbie Dingell also took herself out of the running. Pete Buttigieg, I think in terms of if I were to rank people as to how serious they're looking at this right now, it does sound like a lot of people are encouraging Pete Buttigieg to look at this. He had also reportedly been looking at governor, so he's in that dual category there.
Melissa, can we pause though on Buttigieg, because some people know him as the mayor of South Bend, Indiana, before he became a presidential candidate, and then a cabinet member. But now he lives in Michigan because that's where his husband is from.
Yes, okay. That's true. So about 2 years, I believe it's been about 2 years. That it could be more. I didn't double check that he moved to Traverse City, which is kind of on the Mitten, northwest of the Mitten. It is a very popular kind of resort, vacation area for folks. It's beautiful up there. And so when they adopted their twins, I think they moved sometime around there. They moved up to Traverse City. Now, he's never run for any office in Michigan before, right? As you mentioned, he was the mayor in South Bend, which is just over the state line, but not far off of the state line. But he's never run in Michigan, but he's had this 4 years, of federal experience as Secretary of Transportation in the Biden administration. I think a lot of people know his name. He has a national fundraising network from when he ran for president. So, I always look at the personal side as well. And being that he has 2 little kids, I would argue that maybe running for governor and not commuting from Traverse City to DC, continuing that commute to Washington. If I was his spouse, I would say, please run for governor instead. But again, I think all those kind of decisions, factors play into these decisions. So that's just my personal aside. But it does sound like he is, his team made clear immediately yesterday that he was looking seriously like this.
And I want you to run through the other names, but I'm trying to also When you talked about the mitten, for those of you that aren't from the Midwest or upper Midwest, it's about the shape. Hold up your hand in front of your face. It's the shape of Michigan, and trying to explain where on what looks like a mitten, where, I mean, that's what, Melissa, that's what you were talking about.
Yes. And
but
Traverse
anyway,
City is like up here. I didn't know which hand to use because
and some people are,
screen.
not as many people watch on YouTube, but for those of you, put up your hand in front of your face, and that's sort of the shape of.
That is not to slight the UP at all. The Upper Peninsula
is not represented on the hand.
Is not represented. So we actually don't call it the Mitten State in print, just FYI.
All right. Sorry. Go. I know there were a bunch of other candidates.
So the two women in the congressional delegation, and we can take a brief second to listen to some past ads from both Hillary Scholten and Haley Stevens, who are both being, have their names floated out there. That I think these two campaign ads really underscore both their strengths, but also their differences in how they approach politics.
My day starts here with a cup of coffee and prayer. As a mom of two boys in the year 2022, trust me, both are very necessary. But faith without works is just empty words. And I've had enough of people in Congress serving themselves. I'll go to work for you to get costs under control, bring manufacturing home, and stand up to drug companies for price gouging. I'm Hillary Scholten. I approve this message, and I'll always serve West Michigan.
One thing I learned as Chief of Staff to President Obama's auto rescue, never bet against Michigan manufacturers.
The auto industry was about to go belly up. And Haley Stevens, by the way, she was there. She was a critical part of my team that helped the American auto industry come roaring back.
I'm Haley Stevens, and in Congress, I'm working with manufacturers to lead our country through its next recovery. I approve this message because the Michigan auto industry drives the American economy.
So those were campaign ads from 2022 and 2024 from Hillary Scholten and Haley Stevens. Melissa, what are you hearing about the two congresswomen and their potential plans and this Senate race?
I'd say that it doesn't surprise me that either of them are looking at this because, they both have experience running in competitive, swing districts. Stevens, of course, Haley Stevens has been redistricted and she's now in a heavily Democratic seat, but they both have experience, running in purplish districts and know how to kind of speak to voters across the aisle. I would be surprised if they either of them ended up doing it, only because their House seats are pretty safe right now. And if you run, it's for the Senate, it's not a guarantee. So maybe they jump into the primary for a little bit. So I don't know. I think I haven't been able to talk. They're not in DC this week, so I haven't been able to talk to each of them individually. But I'm kind of interested to see what they end up doing. I think that another name in the delegation that is very new, Kristen McDonald-Rivet. She just took over Dan Kildee's seat in kind of the Tri-Cities area, Tri-Cities area of Michigan, and she overperformed Harris by like 6 or 7 points, I believe. Really kind of talking a lot about economic issues and kitchen table issues. And I think people would not count her totally out, although I'm sure that they are still like getting the phones set up in their district offices. It's like she's a freshman. She just came in, but there's just a lot of respect in the party for her, I think, right now.
Can I throw a curveball at you and tell me if I'm totally off base or not? Andy Levin, any conversation about him, the former congressman, progressive darling who lost that primary to Haley Stevens after redistricting in 2022?
His name did not come up yesterday. I wouldn't count him out. He's a savvy politician. I think that he might have the same problem in a Democratic primary, that he did when he ran against Haley Stevens, in that groups, pro-Israel groups would probably come after him, given some of his positions in legislation from when he was in the House. But he knows how to raise money. He's he's got a lot of respect, particularly on the progressive side of the party. So it wouldn't surprise me if he jumped in either, but I had not heard his name yesterday.
Yeah. And of course, this is his uncle's seat, correct?
Yes. Gary Peters took Carl Levin's seat. Yep, in 2015. So yes, it would have been. But I will put him on my. Now that you bring it up, I'll put him on my list to call today. The other two names I would. the other two names I would throw out there, Lieutenant Governor Garland Gilchrist, who had been looking at a run for governor. He is looking at this Senate seat now. And State Senator Mallory McMorrow, who is kind of a rising star in the Democratic Party. She spoke last year at the DNC, at the convention. She is also looking at governor and Senate, which was news to us yesterday. I don't think we knew that she was looking at both. Didn't know that she was looking still at governor. And then Abdul Sayed, he's a progressive who ran for governor against Whitmer the first time, and is now the health director for Wayne County, the largest county in the state. He's got decent name ID. He was actually a Rhodes Scholar, similar to Buttigieg, and I think he would make any Democratic primary interesting. And I did also hear Dana Nessel, had put her name out there yesterday, maybe, or I saw her name floating around. I don't know how serious that is. Dana Nessel is the Attorney General, of course, of the state, and is also term limited.
Yeah, it doesn't sound like. Well, let me ask it. Let me phrase this in the form of a question, since we brought you. Are any of these candidates? Do they have the ability to clear a Democratic primary field? And the second question is, if there is a competitive Democratic primary, is there any risk that the Democratic nominee has big liabilities that would make it more difficult for Democrats to hold this in a general election?
That is a good question. Because the last time, of course, that is what happened with it. There was a coalescing pretty quickly around Alyssa Slotkin, who, of course, is our new senator now in Michigan. But I think that, of all the people that we've listed here, I think there's a bit of a extra emphasis on Buttigieg right now, I would say. I interestingly talked to Senator Stabenow yesterday about, her reaction to the news with Senator Peters. And when I asked her who she thought would look at this, she said, of course, members of the delegation would look at it. And then she said a lot of people were encouraging Pete Buttigieg to look at it. And she mentioned his name a couple times, which I thought was interesting. Again, I'm not reading. We're literally, the news is a little over 24 hours old. So I don't want to make any assumptions here as to what people are going to do. But I could imagine that if Buttigieg got in and raised a lot of money quickly, that would make an impression on the rest of the field. So, and that's really what Slotkin did. She came in and she just raised big bucks really quickly. She came in with a strong brand, I would say, in Michigan and in the House. And she just had to really build that name ID statewide because she didn't have that. And I would argue that Buttigieg probably would, need to also work on that because he's never run statewide in Michigan. But none of these, with the exception of Gilchrist, looking at my list here, with the exception of, Garland Gilchrist, who's ran as the lieutenant governor to Whitmer, nobody has those chops. So it would be an interesting primary. So we'll see. Did I hit all your questions there?
Yeah, no, I think I should do them one at a time, but yes.
And as we've kind of alluded to, Peter's decision doesn't just shake up the Senate race, right? It has ramifications for the governor's race, which at the moment there's just one Democrat and one independent and one Republican in that race. It also, if members of the delegation jump into the Senate race, it'll open up their House seats and create opportunities for candidates to try and make the jump to Congress from the state legislature or county offices or things like that. What one person in particular who it feels like this might really get in a bind, though, is Republican John James from the 10th district. Let's take a brief listen to one of the campaign ads that helped John James finally win an election to Congress after a few cycles of trying.
In combat, the lives of American soldiers were in my hands, but none of us could have survived without lifting each other up. We didn't pick who to sacrifice or who to save. We fought as a family. Unity was everything. That's currently missing in Washington. Politicians from both parties put themselves ahead, and you get left behind. I'm John James. I approve this message. I was trained to leave no one behind. Come along with me.
So that was an ad from Republican Congressman John James. For the last couple months, he had looked like a gubernatorial candidate, but we know that he wants to be a senator because he ran for Senate in 2018. He ran for Senate in 2020. He didn't win either of those races. Now he's got an open seat opportunity if he wanted to take it at the Senate level. Does this change John James's plans? Does Peter's retirement change John James's plans? And what does the Republican side of the ledger look like for this Senate race at the moment?
I would say that is the $1 million question: is what are John James's plans that everybody is asking this week? John James could run for re-election and probably do pretty well for a third term in his swingy Macomb County slice of Oakland County seat for U.S. House. He could run for governor and he could run for Senate now. And I think everybody is waiting for the answer to that question. He didn't give any hints yesterday. He tweeted something like brighter days are ahead. And that was it. So, and trust me, that was not for us, trying to, read the tea leaves and all of his consultants who talked to him and his advisors. So it kind of remains to be seen. I think that he's tried the Senate route before, and so maybe he gives it a shot with governor. It's a different, a bit of a different animal, being in the executive. So I think we just have to wait and see. Everybody's kind of waiting for that decision. I'm sure the NRSC and the NRCC are banging down his door, trying to get him to hurry up. The other name I would throw out there is probably an obvious one, Mike Rogers, who just ran against Alyssa Slotkin, kept her from getting over 50% of the vote in November and lost by, I think, about 19,000 votes overall. It was very close. He, of course, had trouble raising money. He was vastly outspent by her, and still that finish was again very narrow. So I think that he could easily kind of just reactivate his campaign infrastructure and start building that brand again that he had going. Bill Huizenga, the congressman from West Michigan, is also looking at this seriously. He, just a side note, that he previously had been, he still is serving on the House Financial Services Committee. I think he was really hoping for that gavel. It didn't happen for him. And so maybe, that has prompted him to take a more serious look at leaving the House than he would have before. So Tony Dungy, correct me if I'm wrong. We tried hard to figure out whether this was serious yesterday, but he apparently is looking at this. It's real. He, of course, is a former Indianapolis Colts coach. For anybody that doesn't watch football, which is I am in that category. Apparently, he is on TV every Sunday night doing football NFL analysis every Sunday night. I think that means he would come in with, name ID from some segment of the Michigan electorate, but he is a Michigan native. He's from Jackson, which is the birthplace of the Republican Party, depending on who you talk to. And I don't know where he lives now. I don't know much about him, and I don't know how serious this is. But he's a name. I think he'd still, he'd have to work to build that out, because there's certain people who don't watch football, who, maybe or don't pay attention to football, who don't know who he is.
He is also in, I think, pretty popular in some conservative evangelical circles as an author and a speaker. He
Yes.
might have a broader network to raise money, but it would be pretty amazing if this general election boils down to the former coach of the Indianapolis Colts against the former mayor of South Bend, Indiana, for the Michigan Senate. Like that would be pretty amazing. But
It really would. The only other name I'd throw out there really quickly, a bit of a wild card, State Senator Jonathan Lindsay. This is a former Special Forces veteran. His father-in-law is Arthur Laffer, who is a Republican advisor to economic advisor to many Republican presidents, including Trump. Lindsay was the first endorsement that Donald Trump made in 2022 in Michigan for anything when he was running for the legislature. And so I think we can't count this guy out, even though he doesn't have the same, I don't think his name is known nearly as well as some of the others we've mentioned here. But as everybody knows, Donald Trump can play kingmaker in this primary pretty easily, as he did last year in endorsing Rogers. So we'll see.
Yeah. And if we can just zero down into the 10th district for a moment, because with John James potentially running for either governor or Senate, we could have an open seat in one of the state's most competitive congressional districts. And there was a story that came out in Politico the other day about Carl Marlinga, who's the Democrat who's been the nominee there for the last two cycles unsuccessfully. It quoted a Democratic operative who said that Marlinga running in 2026 would be an absolute disaster for House Democrats, said a top House Democratic operative. So what is your read on that district and the Marlinga factor here? Are there other people who could run there, and can Michigan Democrats prevent a third opportunity, and potentially their best opportunity if John James is running elsewhere in the 10th district, from slipping away?
Yeah, I mean, they'd have to have a serious talk with Carl Marlinga. I think that if he jumped in again, he's just hard to beat. That he's run in Macomb County for like decades, and he just has this name ID that is hard to beat. He's very well spoken. He's a very smart guy, former judge, former county prosecutor. He's struggled on the fundraising front. I do wonder, with this kind of push away or trend of people trying to encourage Democrats from continually relying on the elder statesmen, the older generation of Democrats, and get some new blood in there. I know Marlinga is I think he's got to be near 75, and so he's not the younger generation in any way, shape, or form. There's several women that got into the Democratic primary last time and tried to beat him, and they didn't come close. So I think you'd need someone to either try to convince Marlinga not to run, or someone who does have come out from the outside with maybe some self-funding or something like that, or very strong name ID to try to compete with him. I haven't talked to Marlinga recently about what he's going to do, so I can't predict there. I do think the other folks that might look at that race are in the state Senate. Kevin Hertel, the Hertel family is a big name in Michigan Democratic circles, and Veronica Kleinfeld is another state senator. Now, of course, there would be concerns about their seats because there's a very narrow margin right now in the state Senate, and so I think that there would be some concern if they would try to jump in and run for Congress. There's also a Republican, former Senator Mike McDonald, I think would look at that race in terms of running on the Republican side if James decided not to do it. And then you have a bunch of self-funders that, of course, could come in from outside of the district and have in the past, to try to win that seat.
And if we zoom all the way out, with this House race, even though it is currently held by John James as a Republican, the midterm election could be difficult for Republicans if there is a backlash among voters to President Trump and perceived Republican overreach and the need for checks and balances. So that's why Democrats could have such a great opportunity in a seat that is currently held by a Republican. And Peters deciding to retire from the Senate this cycle might be the best scenario for Democrats in terms of that the overall political environment might be a little more favorable this cycle for in a midterm rather than in the presidential year where Trump was at the top of the ticket and Slotkin, barely squeaked by because Trump was doing so well at the top, and Trump won't be on the ballot in 2026. So this could play, the environment, which we still don't know because we're almost 2 years out, could be to Democrats' benefit in both of these races.
I 100% agree. And I think that would had to be a factor for Gary Peters, coming from the DS. He knows that. I think that he figured this was the time to do it if he was, going to try to give his party a shot at keeping that seat.
Melissa, thank you so much for joining us. This has been a real pleasure. I think anyone who's listened to this understands there are so many interesting races going on in Michigan this cycle. We're going to have you back sometime soon to talk through these contests as they develop further. But we're so glad you made time for us today. And thanks so much for joining us to talk about the Senate race, the governor's race, House races, and everything going on in the Wolverine State.
Well, thank you for having me. It was fun.
Thank you.
Now it's time for our final segment. Look what I found. This is anything we've stumbled across recently that's interesting. It doesn't have to be political. It could be a TV show, a movie, an album, a book, something else entirely. You never know what you're going to get. I will start, since this is a Michigan-themed episode, I will shout out Argus Farm Stop in Ann Arbor, Michigan, which is, there are a couple of them. They are farm stands, essentially. They sell baked goods. They have a coffee shop, and they have kind of a little grocery store. The coffee is great. The pastries are good. And it's just like a really fun, cute little place to go if you're ever in Ann Arbor, which is itself a cute little place as well.
So I'm unfamiliar. Is this a chain, a small local chain?
I don't know the corporate structure. There are several locations
okay.
of Argus. There's one downtown. There's one further out, kind of by the hockey stadium. And I believe there's another one as well that I haven't been to. But there are several options if you so choose.
Well, I guess what I found was Taco Bell. I think there are a few of these in Michigan, but more specifically, I found the one on H Street, which is 2 blocks from my house. It's finally open. This is a little bit dangerous for me as someone who admittedly has been eating some Taco Bell for the last 30 years of my life. I've only been once so far, which I feel like is a pretty good self-control on my part. But if you're ever wondering if God has a sense of humor, this Taco Bell is located directly adjacent to the OrangeTheory gym that I try to go to. So it's really, there's a lot of feelings when I go to that part of the block. But I'm revealing all my cards.
OrangeTheory is probably giving Taco Bell a kickback on the extra business that they're getting. It's a symbiotic relationship.
My net calories, I don't know. I don't know if I probably should track to see what that looks like. But anyway, it is quite a moment. As someone who was, when I grew up, most people know I grew up in Dallas, Oregon, and there was not a Taco Bell in our town. There was a Taco Time, but we would try to get to West Salem to the Taco Bell, miles away.
The bustling metropolis of West Salem.
Exactly. It's much bigger now than what it was back then. Now it's huge, huge Oregon standards. So anyway, if you're on that block of H Street, there's a good chance you might see me at one of those establishments.
Perhaps one after the other. Directly.
Grab me if you do see me at one of those. Grab me, and we could talk about a few month comp subscription.
At Inside Elections, we provide nonpartisan analysis of congressional, presidential, and gubernatorial races. With a combination of reporting and data, we break down the key races and bring valuable context to complex elections. Go to InsideElections.com to subscribe to the bi-weekly newsletter. We've got individual subscriptions and group packages that are tailored for association and corporate PACs. If you liked this episode, please subscribe to the podcast and rate us on your favorite platform. If you're watching on YouTube, hit the thumbs up button, subscribe, and leave a comment. If you didn't like today's episode, please email Tony Dungy. We also want to thank our producers, Alan Tazinski and Melissa Lenner of Pretty Easy Podcasts, and associate producer, Conrad Tolosa. Please come back and join us next time.